I've been debating whether I should wear my Zika outfit or not, and I decided not to. Bad for my hairdo. Thank you all for coming today. We're now N-1 to the end of the lecture series. And today we're going to hear from an engineer that's actually been very interested in figuring out how to either get rid of the CO2 that's in the atmosphere or produce less of it. But before we go there, I'd like to just thank again those that have been kind enough to support the lecture series now for many, many years. And let me just say a little bit before we all clap about what each one of these individuals is all about, because it's actually quite interesting and important. Agnes Helms, who was a good friend and died not long ago, an extraordinary woman that gave the money that allowed us to build the tree ring laboratory building. And I welcome all of you to visit the tree ring lab. Tree rings, the research of tree rings is an invention of the University of Arizona. Talk about innovation. And the building itself is beautiful. And Agnes Howry was an individual that allowed that building to be built. But importantly, after she passed away, the rest of her estate was given to the University of Arizona to create a program on global climate change and social justice. Because as you probably already have realized, the ones that are getting it in the shorts, as it were, are the people that can't really run away from global climate change. So that's, they've supported this lecture series, and they're supporting a great program in our community that deals with the environment and social justice. The Arizona Daily Star has been an amazing program that has understood what we've been trying to do, which is connect with the community, partner with the community, and give the community the education that I think we all require so that we can have really a functioning democracy. And they're the ones that not only been supportive of us, they've been supportive of the program, of this document that comes out on a Sunday once a year that talks about science, but they've also been instrumental in creating the book festival. So they're really an amazing operation. Blue Cross Blue Shield has, since day one, recognized again that we're serving the community through these lectures, and I thank them for it. Galileo Circle, as I mentioned a few times already, they're the core of the support for the College of Science. They, through their annual contribution to the College of Science, not only give funds, so that last year we were able to give more than 60, I think it was more like 100, scholarships and fellowships of more than $1,000 to the students of the College of Science. In addition to funding this, helping fund this lecture series. And to give you a sense of how important this group is, I'll just give you a little vignette. One of our faculty members in geosciences, who I think should be in the National Academy of Sciences, Jay Quaid is his name, and he's done amazing stuff. And right now his interest is figuring out the oldest hominids that exist anywhere. So he's been, the Lucy business and so on. And he called me and he said, I'm going to Ethiopia on my sabbatical. I don't have a funding from the National Science Foundation because it takes too long, but I think I know where I can find hominids that are greater than 5 million years old. And I'm paying it through my bank account. And the Galileo Circle members, or the funds that they've allowed me to create, I was able to give him enough money so that he could still basically pay his rent. And he's just called me back saying that indeed what he thought was there was there. He can't tell me because it's sort of state secret, but he's actually found hominids that are greater than 5 million years, and that's a research operation at the U of A. That's what we can do. GODAT design, the reason you can actually read the slides, the reason that you can actually partake of the beauty of the various posters and whatnot is GODAT, Ken GODAT. But in addition to that, he spends an enormous amount of time with our lecturers as we try to create these lecture series through conversation about what everybody should be talking about. And Ken has the most synthetic capacity of putting things together that I've ever known. And what you see here today is in part because of Ken. The Marshall Foundation, well, all of you, many of you eat in the restaurants now in University Street. If it wasn't for the Marshall Foundation, University Street would still look like Nogales, to put it bluntly. So not only have they beautified the area around the university, but they support us greatly with not only this lecture series, but they've just come up with chairs for faculty at the University of Arizona, which they handsomely support. Patent law of Nguyen and Tarbet. He is a colleague that he has been funding the chemistry department at $25,000 a year, trying to find collaborations between chemistry and our community. Raytheon, of course, everybody knows Raytheon, and they are one of the biggest employers here, one of the folks that hires most of our engineering students, but they also care about who we are, and it shows it in the things that they support. Research Corporation, which was the first corporation, the first entity in the United States that funded research. It came before the National Science Foundation. Its headquarters are here, and they support us greatly. And Vantage West Credit Union, which has my credit card and my bank account, and they also care greatly about the University of Arizona and our community. So I think we should thank them all for what they really represent. So now the lectures that we've had till today are lectures that have told us about the atmosphere, they've told us about the ocean. Importantly, the ocean just basically absorbs an enormous amount of heat and CO2. The atmosphere is sort of taking the brunt of what global climate change is. We talked a little bit about food security. Interestingly enough, if you have to remember anything, is that the yield of plants as temperature goes up really becomes problematic. So it's not only lack of water, it's truly temperature increase. And last week, the couple of other lectures we had was about the ecosystem and the sad situation that our ecosystems are moving through as global climate change progresses. And last week, one good news was that some of the diseases that we were worried about, it really isn't mostly global climate change, it's transportation. So there you go, at least that one we can't blame on global climate change. So don't take airplanes or take boats, but that's the issue with that. Today we sort of try to turn around and we talk about, well, what are we, I mean, we're smart enough, we got ourselves in this pickle, what are we trying to do to get out of this pickle? And in fact, most of what we need to do to get out of this pickle is engineering. And you can think about it in two ways. One of them is, how can we get rid of the CO2 that's already in our atmosphere? That's called carbon sequestration. And how do we actually pollute less CO2 through technology? Kim Ogden, who's a professor in engineering, and by the way, it's the first day, the first lecture that I've seen the Dean of Engineering here. So, nice, nice. So here we're gonna hear her. She got her degree. She has an impeccable pedigree from University of Pennsylvania, University of Colorado, and then she went to spend some time in Los Alamos. But her main interest is really how do you deal with algae to produce fuels that would compete with fuels that are based from fossil fuels. She is a technical guru of a big organization that has to do with industry, the government, and a bunch of universities dealing with these very complicated issues. But what I like about Kim more than anything else, besides her smarts, is that she's very interested in teacher education. And for 10 years, she's had a National Science Foundation program where she brings in teachers from the community, works with them on these new technologies, and then these technologies maybe can show up in K through 12 through our communities. Kim, where are you?
Thanks. Well, thank you all for coming tonight. It's great, like always, to see so many people from Tucson here. And as the engineer, I have to, since my dean came, that was brought up, and since I'm the first engineer, a little more pressure, right? The engineers have to make sure we fit in with the scientists and do an okay job. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit today about carbon sequestration and carbon capture. So before we get going, I want to always make sure that we're all on the same page. So if we're going to talk about what are we going to do about carbon, first let's see a little bit about how do we put it into the atmosphere to start with so that we are all on the same page. So this is a graph here that shows here in the US, where do we put carbon dioxide into the atmosphere? What do we do to make it go into the atmosphere? You can see here a lot of it's due to electricity, a lot of it's due to our cars, our jets, a lot of it's due a little bit for agriculture, and a lot from industry. So if we want to get rid of CO2 or sequester it, then we probably have to do different things for different sectors. So we're going to kind of talk about a suite of things today, because if there was a silver bullet and there was just one way to do it, we would have done it, right? If we could have just stopped putting CO2 into the atmosphere, we would have done it a long time ago. So we're going to talk about a variety of different tools and things that we can do to get CO2, use less of it, make less of it, and how we can get it out of the atmosphere. And one of the things we also have to think about is power. We're going to continue to use more and more power, and a lot of the power that we have is just going to keep increasing. People want electricity and they want power. And as we go forward, we are going to change how we make that power. So we're going to do some things. You know, we're switching from coal to natural gas, and in 2035, we might use less and less coal. But the good thing is, we're also hopefully going to do a lot more renewables. So as we go forward, one of the answers and one of the things is to make less in the first place. And to do that, we need to do things like renewable technology. So we're going to spend a bit of the lecture on that, because that's what I do every day. So the other last thing I want to give you in terms of background is, let's look a little bit at a power plant, because a lot of things that are very important are from a power plant. So how do we make power? We take our stuff, our coal, our wood, our gas, something like that, and then we burn it. So we put it together and we burn it. And we burn that fuel, we make carbon dioxide and water. And that carbon dioxide goes up a stack. So if you see the term flue gas or stack gas, that's that carbon dioxide coming out the top. And that's one of the things that we want to try to capture. The other thing that we do is, once we make that steam, then we use that steam to run a turbine to then use a generator and feed the grid. So we have to think about this a little bit, so that we might want to talk about different ways and what we're going to do out of a stack. So a little outline about what we're going to do and talk about tonight in terms of CO2, since we have a little bit of background. Well, we can capture it. So we're going to talk a little bit about capturing technologies. How do we capture CO2 from power plants or our cars? We're going to talk a little bit about storing it. Once we capture it, where can we put it? Can we put it someplace and keep it there safely? And we're going to talk a little bit about reducing it. How do we not make so much to start with, so that we have less that actually ever goes into the atmosphere by new technologies? So we'll start with capture. So this is a power plant. This is the power plant that is a picture of it. It's the one that's up by Lake Powell. And you can see that there's some stuff coming out the stack. You actually see the water vapor, but the CO2 is coming out there as well. And we want to actually capture that CO2. And there's a couple technologies to do that. And I'm not going to go through all of them, but there's some chemical techniques and some other things. And I'm going to just show you how one of them works so that you get an idea. And I know there's other ones, because people in this audience here have been emailing me and telling me all their great technology. So I am not going to be doing all of those, but I picked a couple to share with you tonight. So the first thing we're just going to show is, how do you absorb it? How do you actually take that CO2 out of the atmosphere? Well, if you have a power plant, here's a little schematic. And you can see on the pink there, if you have some gas coming out of your power plant, well, you can take that flue gas, and the first thing you probably want to do is take a little bit of the water out of it, and so you can condense it. And then after some of that water is removed, you can put it into an absorption column. You can use a bunch of different types of things to absorb that CO2, and this example shows you an amine solution. So it gets captured in that amine solution, and then out the top of the stack is a flue gas or gas that now doesn't have CO2 in it anymore. So you've captured it in this amine, but you want to be able to use this amine solution over and over again. So what you would do then is desorb that solution so that you can recycle that amine and more CO2 comes out and you can capture it. And then what you do is you get a really, really concentrated carbon dioxide stream. So you might take something that's like 5% to something that's like 95%, so that you have something very, very concentrated that you have taken from the atmosphere and we can do something else with. What about my car? What if I wanted to remove carbon dioxide from my car? Well, that thing I just showed you is a little, might be a little big to put on the back of my car, to have this big liquid thing and stuff like that. So what can we do for the car? Well, here maybe you might use something like a membrane. And a membrane is nothing more than like a filter. So just like you might filter your water, you can actually filter gases. So you can have a filter or a membrane where CO2 goes through and the rest of the stuff doesn't. So you could kind of take the CO2 out and maybe then absorb it on something like a sieve matrix. What would this look like? Well, what you'd have to do is put something, on your exhaust, right? So you'd have to put something in the back of your car, out the back of your car to be able to absorb this. And then, just like when you go and get your oil changed or something, then you probably have to change out your little CO2 absorber thing as well. But this could be possible. But probably this isn't going to be our top thing. We saw maybe like 30% for all transportation is where our CO2 is coming from. So this would be a smaller thing that we would deal with. And it'd probably add a couple $1,000 to your cars. Another thing that you could do is, what if we just took it out of the atmosphere? So we'll talk a couple ways you could do that. And it's very, very dilute in the atmosphere though, right? So it might have some out of a power plant, but actually taking it out of the atmosphere, you need to concentrate a lot of CO2 out of the atmosphere. So we know it's going up, but it's still pretty dilute. And so they are doing research in this in Australia. They actually have these big fans and stuff, and then they do some absorption onto columns and work on taking it out of the atmosphere. And so this is something you could do, but you've got to move a lot of air, and it'd be pretty costly. So what about biomass? Well, we could do that as well. So we know that naturally carbon dioxide is taken out of the atmosphere from our trees and plants. So we can always make more plants. So that's certainly an option. We can use crops. So we talked a little bit on one of the other things that we got some food shortages. Well, we can continue to grow more food. Food is a good thing. We like to eat. And here in Arizona, we grow a lot of food. So for example, right now, all the lettuce you might be eating probably came from Yuma. Okay, so we do a lot of food, and it can take a lot of carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. So we want to do that. And then we can take it out of the atmosphere with things like microalgae. So we're going to talk about that too, because that's how I spend my days when I'm not at home. I grow algae. The other thing that we want to do is, what if we capture it and convert it to something biologically? And this is going to be something else that's in our toolbox. And one of our toolbox to get some stuff out is actually capturing things and turning it into fertilizer or biochar. How does this work? Most things we think about are carbon neutral. So when you think about a plant, you take carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere, you grow your plant, you eat your plant, something happens, it digests, it goes back into the atmosphere. You have a circle. It's a carbon neutral type of thing. So what if we take some of this and take some of that carbon dioxide out of that whole system? Well, we can do that. And if you do that, you do something, you add something, it's called a pyrolysis unit. A pyrolysis, not paralyzed, pyrolysis type of thing. And what this is you actually are going to use no oxygen, and you can make what's called biochar. It's kind of like how you make charcoal. So you take something and you can make something that you could burn, or you could use it for fertilizer. So let me show you what this looks like a little bit, something where you could get a little handle on it. How could we do this in Arizona? Where's a good place for this technology? Okay, so if you go from here and you drive up to Phoenix, you see pecan trees, right? And you see pecan trees around here. So what if we took the carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere? We grow our pecans, we harvest our pecans, we eat our pecans, they're tasty. And then you got to trim your trees. Okay, so that tree trimming stuff, just like I have to trim my garden, my cactus, and that kind of stuff, what if I took those trees and put those through something like a special unit, a pyrolysis unit, got a little bit of fuel out of it, and turned the rest of it into something like biochar that could fertilize my garden? This is pretty cool. You could take about 30 or 40% of the carbon dioxide out of that circle. So this isn't carbon neutral. This is something that actually grabs it out of the atmosphere. This is something else that's in our toolbox. It's one of the other solutions that we can do. It's a little bit more of a regional thing, right? It's maybe where there's forests with down wood or something like that. It's a regional, small-scale thing that can get some of the carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere and start to solve some of our problems. But it's not going to serve it all. It's not enough. But we need all these little pieces, parts. So what about storing it? So this you hear quite a bit about. What if we pump it and store it? So this is what people propose. Take carbon dioxide, you take it out of the flue gas, and you deep six it. Very, very, very far. So like 4 Empire State Buildings worth underground. Okay, so we take this and we pump it way underground, and we pump it into a porous rock. This is something that we actually do, and we've done it for years, and we do this when we're doing enhanced oil recovery. So what happens is you pump this underground, and if the blue here is actually your carbon dioxide, it's displacing oil, and it's squishing the oil out of the rock. And then that oil is released, and you just keep moving that oil with the carbon dioxide out of the rock, and the oil goes out the other side, and then you use it in your cars or whatever you use it for. One of the things with this is it's really stuck underground. So once you put it in there, you're taking carbon out and you're putting different type of carbon in there, and that carbon can actually calcify and just really, really stick under the ground. So this is one solution, but let's look at this a little bit more. If you're going to do something like this, is it safe? Okay, do we want it safe? Well, where does it stay? It stays in porous rock. So it stays in areas of rock like sandstone or something that are really porous, so it just sticks down in there. And it's capped by like something that's like shale, so it's stuck under there. So it's very deep, and it's stuck there by the shale, so that's pretty good. And we've been doing this for years. The question is, think about transporting that. There is not that kind of rock next to every power plant. So I don't think we could take it out of TEP and put it right underground, right under Tucson, right there. It's probably not the best idea. So we need things with the right geology. So how do we move stuff around the United States? We actually have a lot of the infrastructure for this already. This is a picture of all of the natural gas lines that are through Arizona and New Mexico and parts of Texas. Okay, so if you have gas heat, which some of you probably do, or gas hot water, gas stove, there's actually this intricate pipeline already across the United States that gets the gas to our houses. So if we have this gas coming to our houses already, and we're transporting stuff through all these pipelines, and we're getting stuff from Texas to get to Arizona, there's already the pipes under there. So what if we used these to pipe CO2 back to do enhanced oil recovery? And people actually do this. They take carbon dioxide from Wyoming, and they take it down a pipeline to Texas. And down in Texas, they actually use the carbon dioxide, just like in that picture that I showed you. They transport it all that direction, all that distance to actually pull it out. and use this for secondary oil recovery. So the Texans, they can have all our carbon dioxide. So we'll just give it to Texas. It's a big state. They can have what we want. So when we do those types of things, this is one thing we can do. And again, it's part of the solution, actually putting the carbon dioxide back underground. We talk about this too, and this is something the Brits definitely want to do. Every time the Brits are going to build a new power plant, they're going to deep six part of the CO2 using something like this. Okay, that's their new strategy. Oceans. People talk about pumping this into the oceans. Well, we've already been there. We saw that whole presentation. The first one, we decided that's not a good idea. We got plenty of CO2 in the ocean, and I'm not a big fan of that, but people are thinking of that too. What if we pipe it down into the ocean? But then I don't know if we have the infrastructure for that, or what are we going to do? Put it on a big ship somehow and then empty the ship? I don't know. I don't know how that works. It doesn't work for me that much, but it is another option. So some people are thinking of putting it in the ocean. It might be better. I don't know. You can think about that. But what does it cost? So if I want to add this whole extra little part to my power plant, it's like, ooh, what does that cost me? It's a little pricey. If I want to do that, I need to increase the output of my power plant by like 30%, 20 to 30%. There's a lot of estimates. So if I want to actually sequester and deep six my CO2 out of my power plant, then my power bill is going to go up by 20 or 30%. So in the summer, if my power bill is $400, if I have a big house or whatever, that means it's now going to cost me $500 to air condition it. So you have to think if that's what we're going to do. But again, that is one part of the solution. So storing it is certainly something that's part of the solution. And people are doing this and testing it and making sure it's safe. So what else can we do? How can we reduce CO2 production? Well, we can conserve energy. That's kind of a no-brainer, so we don't make as much. We can use all those energy-efficient appliances, right? It's hard to go into a store and not see, the little star things and blah, blah, blah. And we can buy, better ones. So that's good. And we can use better fuels in our cars. So we have a hybrid, people are doing electric cars. You can do some other things here as well. And so these are all things that we can do. And actually, per capita, the amount of CO2 that's being generated is decreasing. So that's good. So we are doing some things. But the problem is we're expecting a lot more people. And all of these people want food and water and energy. And so based on having all these things, if you're going to have food, water, and energy, then we have to definitely, we're going to put more CO2 into the atmosphere. So we got to think of something else. So it's not going to be just the per capita thing is going to bring it down, but we got to work a little bit harder and not making so much. So let's talk about clean energy. This is my favorite topic. So the first thing we want to think about is why did TEP decide to get rid of some of the coal and change to natural gas? What does that get you? Well, it gets you quite a bit. And that's really cool that TEP did that for us, and that's why it was in the papers and so forth, and there's a big deal. So if we take something like hydrogen, we don't make any carbon dioxide, but hydrogen economy, not quite there yet. It's not economical. But look at natural gas. You've got 4 hydrogens to 1 carbon. You have a high energy content, and you make a little bit of CO2. And compare that to coal or oil, you have less hydrogen to carbon, so your ratio changes in terms of carbon to hydrogen. The energy content goes down, and you also make more CO2. So by changing from coal-type things to natural gas-type things, this is cleaner. That's why they say it's a cleaner fuel. You make less carbon dioxide. So this is part of the solution, and we're doing that. And we produce methane now, natural gas in the U.S., just like we produce coal. But what are some other sources of energy that we don't have? We still have nuke. Okay, nuke is still part of the solution. Some people don't like nuke, but there is quite a bit of nuclear energy, and we have some in Arizona. We have hydro. You're going to hear quite a bit about hydro and water next week when Dr. Overpeck talks to you about climate change and water. And we know here one of the issues with the water and the hydro is we have less flow through our dams. And if we have less flow through our dams, then we have less power coming out of our dams. But it's part of the solution that's not expecting to grow, but will stay the same. And what about wind? Wind is a really pretty cool one. Okay, so there's lots of windmills, and windmills can certainly generate quite a bit of electricity for you. And you see windmills when you travel around the U.S. and across Europe and things. And wind's been around for a really long time. So this is part of the solution. It's got one of those problems that it's intermittent, and we'll talk about that too. What are my favorites? Well, I'm the one talking, so you get to, hear about my favorites for as long as I want to talk about them. No, I'm just kidding. So we're going to talk about the two things that I like to do a little bit here. And the first one here is solar. Actually, my friends do more of the solar, and some of them are here. And then the second one is algae. So we're going to talk about what do we do in terms of solar to make less CO2, and how do we capture CO2 in things like algae farms to make food and fuel for the world. So we'll start with solar. So most of you are probably used to this kind of solar, okay? So I have a solar water heater on my house. You essentially, grab some of the energy for the sun to heat your water, and, it stores in your little hot water tank, and the next day or whatever, you have some hot water and things like that, and it works pretty much, especially in Arizona. There's only a couple days that I need that electric override. So this is what you're used to, but that cuts down some energy, but it's not, it's not going to solve the problem. We need a lot of things besides hot water. So how does solar thermal work for an industrial scale? Well, we do that in Arizona too. So if you ever drove to San Diego, which a lot of people from here, especially in the summer, drive to San Diego. In Gila Bend, there's this huge solar field. So if you're driving down there and you see all these things on the side of the road, this Gila Bend is a solar field that we have, and it actually produces some power for Arizona. And in this particular one, instead of heating water, you actually heat oil. So you use the sun's mirror to heat oil. Why would you do oil? Well, just like you don't deep fry your French fries in water. That would be very nice for our, calorie intake, but it doesn't work. You need something with a heat capacity like oil. So in these particular things, you can actually heat oil from the sun because it can take a lot more heat. And so if we go back to our power plants, instead of our oil or gas that we were burning, we can grab the power in our mirrors through our solar. We heat up our oil, and then our oil heats our steam and our water that then lets us do a generator and go into the grid. So you can take that burning CO2 part out, and instead you can use some solar. And this is a pretty common thing. The problem, of course, we have is always storage. What happens when the sun goes down? Well, that's a problem. And we definitely want energy all the time, or electricity all the time. So we'll talk a little bit about storage. But one of the good things about oil is where you see that in the middle there, it does carry some heat. Just like if you turn off your French fryer, it is not cold immediately. You got a little bit more time there to generate a little bit more electricity. So we'll talk about storage in a second. And then the other really cool thing is photovoltaics. And here at the University of Arizona, we do quite a bit of research in photovoltaics. And these are even cooler because you don't need all those fluids. We just take all that fluid stuff out of the whole situation here, and you take the sun's rays and you turn it directly into electrons that flow and give us power. So all that moving of oil and water and all that kind of stuff, it goes away. We go right into stuff, and we go right into the grid. And that's really cool about photovoltaics. So it's like, wow, these are great. Why aren't we doing it all the time? Well, let's think about that. One of the great things is cost, the cost of things. And this is the great thing about technology and why we need some engineers. That we we are able to continuously bring down the price of things as we understand how to make one. And this graph shows that a lot. So if it used to be things that are $8 per watt using a PV panel, well, after like a 5 or 6 year period, we've cut that price in half. That's only in a couple years, really. And it's because we've learned a lot more about it. We know how to produce them. The productivity goes up. We get a little bit smarter about manufacturing, and we can supply these to a lot of different people. So this is pretty cool. So we can bring down the prices. And then the other question everybody says about solar is, oh my God, it has to be everywhere. We have to have thousands and thousands of solar panels. And I don't want them in my backyard. Well, is that really true? Well, this is the same kind of picture of Arizona and New Mexico and stuff. And the red parts are where there's a lot of sun, and there's some areas where we could actually put solar panels. And so there was a study done a while ago as how many solar panels would we need? Well, this is the little area we would need to power all of Arizona. When the sun's out, of course. We got the little caveat, sun has to be out, okay? But this is about all the area that we need is about 400 square miles. And this was a study done by APS. That's pretty cool. Because there are some places in Arizona that, most places are beautiful, right? We live in the desert for a while. But what if we put some of these on top of mine tailings or something? Or what if we put it in a couple places, keep putting them out over our parking lots and things like that? Then, that landmass doesn't seem so big. And we could start to do these things. And solar is certainly one of the answers. But of course, there's still research that is required in here. We still need to work on the cost, the reliability, the efficiency, the storage, and the transmission. How do we get it all onto grid, right? So if you've got something that's over your school's parking lot or a U of A parking lot, you still got to get it into the grid so it can be useful. So we work on this too. So here at the University of Arizona. So one of the storage things that's really cool is we use something called molten salt. So figure that you got oil for storage. Take that more and put it into salt. I mean, salt, like a salty slurry type of thing. You can actually even store more heat in that. And there's a few of my colleagues in the College of Engineering that are working on storage through a molten salt, which is really cool. And then the sun goes down and you got quite a few more hours that you can use electricity storing in molten salt. So that's one cool thing. But with PV, you probably want to use a battery. So another research area that's really cool with colleagues in chemistry that they're doing here is they're taking a waste. This is sulfur. This is nasty. This little yellow stuff here. But they have developed new technologies where they take this sulfur waste and they make that into an anode for a battery. And that battery that they're making from this crappy stuff actually lasts as long as the battery that you might have in your cell phone. So it's as good as lithium, and you're making it from stuff that nobody wants. This is really cool. So these things are coming on, and solar is certainly part of the answer. So solar works for a power plant. That could be something that we can make less CO2. But what about our cars and our transportation? How do we deal with the transportation part? So this is a barrel of oil. And when we get a barrel of oil, we use it for quite a few different things. And so we use it for gasoline, diesel, our jets, and other products like plastics. So almost all of the plastics and things that we use come from these barrels of oil. So we need to find alternatives for all these different things. And so even if we have a car or whatever that can be run on a battery or something like that, I think we're probably quite a ways from a jet on a battery, and I'm not so sure I want to be on that jet. And I really like to travel, so that's a problem. So we've got to come up with something else, especially on that jet fuel type of thing, and that's what I work on. How can we make jet fuel by capturing CO2 from the atmosphere instead of taking something out of the ground to make it? So let's first talk about corn. Corn's had a really bad reputation in terms of corn ethanol and so forth, and some of it's deserved and some of it's not quite as bad as it thinks. But if we wanted to change all of the U.S. transportation liquid fuel, that would be cars and everything, all of our barrels of oil, and we wanted to use corn, then we'd have to grow this much corn. This is a little bit of a problem, especially since in 2006 this is all we grew. Okay, so you can see the problem there. It's a little bit of a problem. And it's getting better. You get more corn per acre every year. The people at Monsanto make better corn seeds and blah, blah, blah. But we still got a little ways to go. What about cellulosics? You hear about those. Well, that's not as bad. So when you do corn ethanol, they're talking about just the ear and taking the corn kernels and turning that into ethanol. Okay, but what if you use all the rest of the crap that's on there, the leaves and the stems, and if you used other cellulosic things, tree trunks and trimmings and stuff like that? Well, then you would need about this much land mass if you were going to do this renewably if you use cellulosics. And again, this is part of the answer. So there are about 3 or 4 cellulosic ethanol plants that just opened in the Midwest in the last couple of years. So this is good. You're using kind of junk plants and turning it into fuel. So this is a good thing. But what about algae? Algae's the best, of course. So if we had to use algae to produce sorts of the things from technology from a few years ago, you might need this land mass, but now we're smarter and you could even use shorter small air masses. So you don't need as much land mass for something like algae if you want to grow that. And part of the reason is because you can grow it all year, all the time. And the other advantage of it is if you have like a windstorm or a rainstorm or a sleet storm or something like that, well, it shuts down for a couple days and the weather passes and you clean it up and you start over again. So that's pretty cool. You're not like down and out, if you have a crop that's ruined, you can just restart and start for a couple days. So algae is one of these things that you can take carbon dioxide and we can make food, fuel, and we can make some of these specialty products. These specialty products, the technology is not really there yet, I'll be honest with you, but we're starting to get there. We are not ready to make all of the plastics that we want out of an algae cell yet, but give us a few years. So when you do these types of things, you need a big team of people. You need a lot of smart people to get together and think about it. It is really hard to work by yourself and solve all these problems. So you need a team of people. And so there was this NAB team that I was part of, and it had smart people from government labs, a lot of people from a lot of universities across the country, and of course, the University of Arizona was the lead engineering group on this grant, so that's good. You need, engineers from Arizona involved or in charge. And then, besides having them in charge, you need companies. Okay, so it's not really going to work if I do something in my lab and I'm playing with something like, wow, that's really cool. Somebody's got to take it to market for me, and someone needs to implement it. So we had to work with a lot of companies as well, so that what we were doing in the lab could be maybe sold by companies. There's little companies here, and there's big, huge companies here on this particular group. And in this group, we looked at everything. So we looked at biology, we looked at cultivation, harvesting, and converting into the fuels and stuff that we use. And the whole time, so we didn't have to deal with the ethanol thing, we did modeling and calculations. Every time we make a process improvement, the first thing we had to think about is it going to take less energy? Is it going to take less water? And am I going to get more energy out than I get into my process, so that I'm always having a net energy gain, or what's the purpose? So we do that all the time as well, and we do the economics. So you have to bear with me, learn a little bit about algae. The first thing we do is biology, and there's a picture of what some of the algae look like that we grow in the lab and so forth, and we just don't understand algal biology that much yet. We know bacteria that hurt us, we know things about virus from health, stuff like that, but there's a lot to learn still about algae. These do grow in our swimming pools, but we just want to kill them when it's in our swimming pools. That is really not the goal here. So now what we want to do instead is I want to grow lots of them. I would never swim in it, but I want to grow lots of them. And so we have to understand how they grow. What is the genetics? What is the biology about it? So people work on this. And then what I do is I grow them outside. So I grow algae outside, and the small ones on the right are the reactors that I have, and my reactor farm is at Roger and Campbell, near the rest of the farms for the campus. And these little ones here are about 1,000 liters, and they are what's known as the traditional paddle wheel raceway. And they're called a raceway because these bigger ones, they actually look like that, right? Looks like a car could go around and around and around. So it's a raceway. I call mine the bathtubs, but the Department of Energy thought that was not politically correct to say I was growing things in bathtubs, so I have to be a little bit careful. But paddle wheels is the traditional type of thing. So if we use a paddle wheel raceway, this technology was actually developed in the 1960s, so we got to be able to do better. And we are doing better. So what have we done? Well, the first thing that we did is 4 of my colleagues, and primarily in Ag and Biosystems Engineering, came up with a new reactor system that they patented. This is a pretty cool reactor system, and we have this out at Roger and Campbell as well. And this is a solar-driven system, so instead of using a paddle wheel, and the paddle wheel looks like, the things that move the boats up and down the river, instead of using a paddle wheel, you use a pump. But that pump is solar driven, and you can see algae coming out of a pipe here. And essentially what happens? The sun comes up, the pump turns on, it starts moving things around, all those algae cells can grab all that sun, do a lot of photosynthesis, make more algae cells, and then at night, over on this side, we don't quite deep six them like the other thing, but we put them down in a canal. And they stay in that canal so that you don't have as much water evaporation. They stay kind of warm when it's cold here which isn't often, but sometimes when it's cold here in Arizona, they stay down in there. And then the next day, the sun comes up, we pump them around, more photosynthesis, we get a lot of stuff. The cool thing about this reactor system is the operating cost is close to zero because we don't have to we don't pay for our energy. And the other thing is we're able to get about 30% more productivity out of that. That's cool. 30% improvement, 30% more algae. The other thing that we do is we can hook these up to power plants. So if we want to take carbon dioxide from a power plant and use it directly to grow algae, we can do this. So I do this too. So this is actually a little reactor that is hooked up on the power plant right here on campus. So there's a couple power plants on the U of A campus. We make most of our own power here. And there's one right over here by the math building. And right outside of there, I actually have this little reactor, and I am taking the carbon dioxide out of the flue gas, and I am using that to grow algae, and I'm trying to understand how that works. So I have to show you one graph of data. What do I actually get when I actually grow this? Well, there's a couple of different things here. I have plotted date. This is still working. So this is February 4th, like a week or so ago, until about Valentine's Day. This is the type of data that I'm always taking. You can see temperature, that's up and down. So that is one of the challenges of growing in the desert. It gets really cold and it gets really hot, and the algae have to be able to survive those temperature swings. The other thing I do is I measure the carbon dioxide. So that blue line is actually the carbon dioxide, and I am measuring how much I'm taking from that power plant. So I get an understanding of how much CO2 I can actually sequester in my algae. And you can see when it's cold, there's a little bit during the day, nothing at night. Little bit during the day, nothing at night. It gets hot, I take up a lot more CO2. They're much more happy. And then they grow during the day and not much at night, never at night. The other thing that's cool is the green line is actually my algae growth. And all that's like, oh, sure, that's a little algae growth. Who cares? The cool thing about that is no one's ever done continuous measurement of algae growth before. This is very cool. So we came up with a new sensor technology that we're actually in the process of patenting so that we can continuously monitor CO2 growth as a function of time. So that's pretty cool. And then we hope to sell it, and then I can buy my jet. Just kidding. The other thing that we want to do then is combine my two favorite types of energy. So if I can combine solar energy and I can combine algae, wouldn't that be even better? And so this I do with smart people that are in optical sciences and chemistry. And what our new idea is to take smart glass, which is what the people do in optical sciences. They make this glass, and they have this glass that if you put it on your window, the sunlight can come through it, but you can, on those parts of the panel, you can actually use that as a PV, and you can generate electricity. So you can generate electricity on your windows. What if I could generate electricity on my photobioreactor? Pretty cool. So I get to combine my two things. So my grant proposal for this is due in a week or so. So we'll see if somebody else thinks that's a good idea, but we think it's a good idea. And then after I grow all my algae, then I got to harvest it. So I either can filter it, just like you filter it in your pool, and concentrate it, or maybe I can use fancy things like electrochemical fields and stuff like that. So I have to still take a lot of water, and I have to concentrate it, and then I recycle that water to my reactor. So can I take carbon dioxide and put it through algae using those things, cool reactor designs and stuff like that? Once I get that, can I make food and fuel? Or if I make food and fuel, would somebody eat it? And would it work in my jet? And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the fat part of my cells. So algae make fat, just like a lot of other things. And so that fat we can turn into fuel. And then I can have my fat-free LEA and see if my fat-free protein or whatever, somebody wants to eat my fat-free cells. And these are the people that we're going to see if they would like to dine on it or not. So let's see what happens here. So let's first look at the fuel. This is what it looks like. This is algae paste, green gooey stuff. Then I get crude algae oil, which is the lipid part. It's nasty looking. And then I can change it into this hydrocarbon fuel. And actually, from that black crude stuff to that other fuel, you actually use just the exact same processes that you use to take the crude oil and put it in your cars and jets now. The processes don't change. We need to get rid of a little extra nitrogen. But you use the same things, and UOP actually did this for it. And what UOP did, which is a huge company, part of the Honeywell Corporation, and we got some Honeywell here in Arizona, Same thing. What they did is they made that. They made fuel from algal oil and some other plant oils. They made it into jet fuel, and they actually then flew a jet from the United States all the way down to Australia. So it works. So you can actually make, biofuel and stuff and fly your jets. What about eating, though? Who wants to eat my fat-free algae? Okay, so by fat-free algae, first we fed it to cows. Now, we had to mix it with something. Cows eat a lot, as you can imagine. They need a lot of food. We didn't have quite that much algae. But we mixed it in with the food, and they were okay with that. So the cows ate the stuff, and it gives them a protein source, and it worked out okay for them. Then I tried to feed it to some piggies, and they did not like it. So we have to realize that it has to still be palatable for the animal. And for some reason, the little formula that we made in this one study, the piggies didn't like it. But I'm sure they would like, other things. We just got to do the right mixture. But what we did, they did not like it. So they lost some weight and stuff like that because they didn't think it tasted yummy. The other thing that you can do with your fat-free algae is you can feed it to fish and to shrimp. And this is probably one of the best ideas, right? Because that's natural. As a fish or a shrimp is floating around, they eat algae naturally in the ocean or whatever else. It's there. They're used to it. So they even eat fat-free algae. They will eat the full algae with all the lipid and stuff as well, but they'll eat the fat-free stuff as well. So this is certainly a good thing, and it can be a supplement for our cells, and they can live off of this. Oyster farmers, for example, use this straight. They just feed them algae. You buy algae paste and you feed it to your oysters. Yum, yum. So then the other thing is, what if I want to actually take all of my algae, all of that green stuff, and just make fuel? So I'm not going to make food right now. I'm just all about energy. So I want to take it and make just fuel. So can I take the whole algae cell and put it in my jet? Well, this actually you can do. This is a really cool process. So here what we're going to talk about is the innovation of this whole process. So what you do is you take your whole algae, and then you put part of it through this, you put it in something that's called a hydrothermal liquefaction unit. And what this is you put it under a lot of pressure, and you squish it, and you change it into oil under a lot of pressure. So you get this kind of nasty oil, and it smells horrible, okay, because it's smushed food things or whatever. It's horrible smelling, but that's okay. We just plug our noses. And then you can change that into using the normal processes and turn it into jet fuel. The other thing that you get is kind of a nasty water. This is not water that you would want to return or recycle in the brown stuff. That's actually an aqueous water solution. But that you can put in something called a gasifier, and you can actually get methane out of it. That's pretty cool. So I can get oil, I can get methane. And the other cool thing about this process is I get water that's got extra nitrogen and phosphorus in it. So just like any other plant, an algae cell actually needs nitrogen and phosphorus as well. It needs fertilizer. So I can get my fertilizer in this water, and I can recycle that back to my pond. So I can get my nitrogen and phosphorus back. I can make a nasty oil that I can turn into my jet fuel, and I can actually get a little bit of methane out at the same time. That's pretty cool. And does that work in my jet? Well, no one's flown a jet on this one yet, but the cool thing is we sent it to UOP, the conversion people, and Jet A is a couple of the specifications in terms of the density of the fuel and what point it freezes at and flashes. And this is one of the samples we sent them, and we're within the specs that you need, which is really cool. So all the specs that we need to make to be able to use this in our jet, the UOP people can do that from our nasty smelling oil that we made, so that's pretty fun. So what does this cost? Yeah, that looks exactly what it sounds like. So the cool thing about the good and bad news is when we started our algae project in about 2009, 2010, people were calculating the cost of algal fuel to be about $250 a gallon. That's a problem. Okay, so not too many people would be using that in their cars. I mean, down at the airport last week, $1.21. Really? Okay, $2.50. Not a good idea. But this was in 2009. But what this really shows you is what big teams of researchers can do together, and why it's so cool to work in these big teams with your friends in other disciplines. Little better harvesting technology, we bring down the cost, a little better reactor design, understanding some biology, using this hydrothermal liquefaction. Over a 5 to 6 year period, through a bunch of research and innovation, we were able to drive that cost down from $250 to $7 to $10 a gallon. Now, 7 to 10 bucks a gallon is still a little bit expensive, but think about that. That's orders of magnitude. That is really cool. So send me more money, I'll bring it down. No, I'm just kidding. But as we continue to work on this stuff, that is what's really great about this. We have things that are very expensive, and through all these technologies and working in big teams of people, we can solve these problems for our future, which is very exciting. So I hope today, as we've talked and stuff, we've been able to think about that there's an array of solutions for removing CO2 and dealing with CO2 in the future. There is not that one silver bullet. Let's just do this and poof, we don't have a CO2 problem. Unfortunately, it's not that easy. So we have to work on a lot of different things with a lot of different teams, and then we can solve these problems. So for energy, you can capture some of the CO2 out of your power plant. You can pump it, you can store it. We can store it pretty safely in some places underground. We can switch to solar, some wind, that kind of stuff, so that, all of those things will either take some CO2 and store it or actually produce less CO2 in the future. For transportation, sure, we're going to continue to get more and more energy efficient cars. We're going to have things that, are 40, 50 miles per gallon, that kind of stuff. We don't want to give up on that things. We want to be able to have more fuel efficiency and stuff like that, but we also want to be able to look at things like bio alternatives like algae to biofuels. And, of course, crops are always going to be a big thing. So we're always going to need CO2 to grow food. You can do other food things. You can do things like algae for food to change your food chain a little bit in some ways that work out pretty well. You can do things like biochar that will permanently take some things out. So this is just one set of ideas for solutions, but there are quite a few other things. People are trying to take carbon dioxide and make it into batteries, and there's all kinds of cool things, and people will continue to innovate and learn what we can do for an array of solutions. And just like last week, everybody asks, why do you spend your time doing this when you could pick something else to do? Well, the first thing is can we afford it? And the answer is we're working on it. And the second thing is why is it's important is because we want to do things for our families. We want to do things for the next generation. And so just like our previous speaker, we do things for our families, and in this particular case, our little Navy family here, but that's okay. So, and I thank you for listening tonight.